Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. It's entitled Key Trends in Building Enterprise Applications with HTML5. I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I would like to welcome you here today for this wonderful presentation. HTML5, of course, is a topic that's been resonating a lot with our readers as web applications become more and more important to businesses. And Arthur Kay from Sencha is here today to talk about the trends in HTML5. Before I turn it over to Art, I just want to let you know that you can ask questions for a Q&A at the end of the session by typing a question into the control panel box, hitting submit, and we'll get to as many at the end as time allows. Also, this recording will be available on demand starting next week. We'll send everybody an email to let you know when that's going to be available. And that's it for the housekeeping. So now I'd like to turn it over to Arthur Kay to talk about the key trends in building enterprise apps with HTML5. Art, take it away.
Thanks, Dave. It's awesome to be here. So, as Dave mentioned, my name is Art Kay. I am the Developer Relations Manager at Sencha. And I've been with Sencha for about 4 years now. And during that time, I've had the pleasure of working side by side with many of our Fortune 500 customers. Having said that, I've also been building web applications for about 15 years, and in general, I'm just a total geek about web technology. So if you'd like to learn more about me, you can follow me on Twitter, which you can see here on the screen, or you can visit my blog, which is akawebdesign.com. Well, today we're here to talk about HTML5. And unless you've been living under a rock or on another planet, you've undoubtedly heard of HTML5 and how it has simply revolutionized web application development. During the last 4 or 5 years, it seems like just about every tech conference in the industry has had someone ranting about all the cutting-edge things you can do with web technology. But very often these presentations talk about the shiny new parts of HTML5 within the context of try this in a nightly build of Chrome, or maybe one day you can actually use this in a real app. For those of us who work on enterprise applications, the allure of these presentations may be exciting, but they're certainly not useful in our day-to-day development. The reality is that the enterprise cannot expect users to have a cutting-edge browser, because usually they're supporting legacy browsers, and more often than not, the coolest tech demos simply aren't relevant or meaningful for business apps. Clearly, HTML5 offers a great deal of technological improvement over Web 2.0, and HTML5 promises a continued evolution of its standards and features. But HTML5 also means something beyond just technology and code for enterprise corporations. Managers and executives have bought into the idea of HTML5 as a buzzword because it essentially gives them the holy grail for enterprise software development, that being software applications with rich user experiences can be delivered to any device using the web, and they're all powered using the same standardized technology. HTML5 has enabled the enterprise to develop applications consistently while also increasing the productivity of their development staff. This is a gigantic win for enterprise corporations because they typically support many applications across the organization, and these applications will likely remain in production for as long as 5 to 10 years. When you think about it, that's a significant amount of legacy code. And yet because HTML5 has reached its W3C standardization, the enterprise can be assured that their code will continue to work for many years into the future. In today's presentation, I'm going to begin by describing the current state of HTML5, specifically highlighting certain areas that are most relevant to enterprise application development. Next, I will dive into some emerging trends within the industry, and I'll be sure to discuss how these trends will impact enterprise development teams. Finally, I will cover some important problems that enterprise applications currently face, and I'll discuss some approaches that Sencha takes to solve those issues. By the end of today's webinar, you should expect to walk away with some concrete ideas on what emerging trends within HTML5 will impact your future development cycles, and I'm hoping that you'll agree the future looks brighter than ever. So let's start by discussing what the current state of HTML5 looks like inside of enterprise companies. In October of last year, the W3C published their recommendation of HTML5, signaling that the fully qualified specification for HTML5 was both final and complete. But this fact is actually somewhat misleading. In fact, the recent recommendation is simply a formality, as the major browsers have been working hard for years to deliver HTML5 functionality. Long before it reached the current recommendation status, some organizations like Google and Mozilla started implementing parts of the HTML5 spec. Developers then began discussing and using these features. That feedback found its way back to the W3C, who then modified or advanced the spec, and this cycle went around and around, just repeating itself over several years. The result being that the most recent stable versions of every major browser now all support HTML5. Perhaps the most exciting part about this is that the technology can be found not only on desktop and laptop computers, but also on smartphones, television sets, ebook readers, car dashboards, wearable devices, and many other places. HTML5 is literally everywhere. And as enterprise companies continue to drop support for legacy browsers and outdated operating systems, modern web technology will fulfill its promise of being able to deliver powerful applications on any device. For example, YouTube recently announced it is dropping its Flash video player on all modern browsers. This is a huge sign for HTML5 being quote-unquote ready, because anybody who buys a new computer today will never have to install Flash or a third-party browser plugin like Silverlight just to watch a video. There is tremendous impact for the enterprise in this announcement as well, because enterprise applications often consume video content, and that content is often hosted on sites like YouTube. The movement away from Flash in enterprise software development should cascade very quickly. One more example that's recently been in the news is that Microsoft recently announced Windows 10 will ship with a new browser called Project Spartan, which will take a significant and modern departure away from how Internet Explorer has historically rendered websites and web applications. That's on top of the fact you can already build native Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, and soon to be Windows 10 apps using HTML5 as a first-class development platform. The implications for enterprise applications here are just massive. Large organizations will now default to a standards-compliant browser whose updates are no longer subject to IT mandates. And respected industry studies confirm how web technology continues to grow as a preferred development platform. Vision Mobile surveyed 10,000 app developers last year and found that 42% of them use HTML5 in their mobile apps, either as a hybrid mobile application or using HTML5 inside of an in-app browser. The study went on to state that the future of HTML5 is beyond the browser, meaning that the technology itself, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, will continue to be adopted anywhere applications exist. JavaScript specifically continues to grow in popularity and is now utilized in cross-platform tools and even back-end development through projects like Node.js. What really excites me as a technology geek is that HTML5 is finally achieving the kind of support and performance on mobile devices that we've always wanted. Sencha recently reviewed the HTML5 support and performance on both iOS 8 and Android 5, and the results were incredibly promising. Both of these operating systems now offer greater support for a variety of HTML5 features than ever before, but the performance boosts to both browser and hybrid applications is really what impresses me. There are other platforms such as Windows 8 and Windows 10, Tizen, and Amazon that have all fully embraced HTML5 as a first-class programming platform. So the implications are clear. HTML5 is everywhere you look, and it continues to persevere. So how does all of this good news really impact enterprise applications today? You don't have to look any further than the following buzzwords, each of which was only coined a few short years ago, and yet they are all now an integral part of the lexicon of enterprise application development. With responsive design, HTML5 allows applications to become flexible and change how they display data without significantly altering the underlying business logic. Several years ago, responsive design would have been a cutting-edge feature that only a few enterprise applications might implement. But today, responsive design is a mandatory requirement for most web applications. And as the capabilities of HTML5 have continued to evolve, we find that many enterprise companies have also quickly adopted the cloud as a means to deliver their distributed data. HTML5 lends itself perfectly to the concept of cloud computing, if for no other reason than because applications based on web technology inherently rely on the cloud to load their physical resources. And finally, the rise of HTML5 and cloud computing has also been accompanied by an explosion of data. The applications we see in enterprise companies often consume huge sets of data, and the recent advances of HTML5 make it possible to do this in any browser. The moral of the story here is simply that HTML5 and all of the buzzwords that surround it are now fully ingrained in the application development lifecycle. Enterprise corporations who have historically resisted new technology have now completely embraced HTML5 as a major part of their tech portfolio and business strategy. With the HTML5 specification now finalized as an official standard, web technology will only continue to be utilized as the preferred development platform for enterprise applications. By now, everyone should agree that HTML5 is powerful, mature, and available everywhere. The biggest tech companies, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon, have all embraced HTML5 with open arms. And because they're throwing their weight behind web technology, enterprise organizations finally believe that they can adopt HTML5 as a platform for building their application portfolios. Because the HTML5 specification has been standardized, you might think that there's nothing new and exciting on the horizon for business apps, but that could not be further from the truth. HTML5, the programming language, may have reached its current state of stability, but there are many other areas of web development which relate to HTML5 that the enterprise needs to keep their eyes on. Perhaps two of the biggest improvements to the ecosystem of HTML5 in the coming years will be updates to the JavaScript and CSS languages. So ECMAScript 6 and CSS4 will offer extremely powerful new additions to your development toolbox. And in general, these advances both strive to make developing web applications easier. ES6 will introduce a number of new features aiming to reduce ambiguities in common JavaScript code. These features and ECMAScript 6 in general are not yet available in today's browsers, but all front-end developers should be aware of the pending changes as their impact to application design will be significant. There are also updates to the CSS language that are on the horizon. CSS4 won't have quite as many drastic changes compared to ES6. In fact, many of the improvements in CSS4 will simply improve or extend existing functionality. But again, CSS4 is not available in today's browsers, but understanding what features are coming will help developers plan ahead for future capabilities, as well as the inevitable cross-browser quirks which will arise. Let's take a look at a few quick examples so that you can see how ES6 and CSS4 will impact typical web applications. One of the most important and distinct advances of ES6 will be the addition of familiar object-oriented class structures using classical programming style. A number of improvements in how runtime code is scoped will also be introduced, solving many common problems through subtle changes in JavaScript syntax. Indeed, there will be a number of tremendous other additions to ECMAScript 6, but we're not going to explore all of them in today's presentation. At the end of the day, ES6 simply promises cleaner, more efficient code, something that will clearly benefit enterprise applications. In the example on the left, in the example on the left, we see a JavaScript class built in ECMAScript 5, which is runnable in today's browser. In reality, JavaScript today doesn't have actual classes in the classical object-oriented programming sense, but its functional nature certainly allows us to write code in a pseudo-classical style. The lack of true classes in ES5 unfortunately can lead to confusion and quirky runtime errors. On the right, we can see how ES6 will implement classes. The JavaScript in the example on the right actually resembles code that many C# or Java developers might recognize. We can see the class keyword and how it is used to denote that the structure we have defined is in fact a class and specifically not a function. ES6 classes will require your code to use the new operator, and this means that any precompilers or code linters will catch errors well before runtime, which is great. ES6 will also enable classical inheritance, block scoping, and a variety of other concepts that enterprise developers have come to expect. But like I said, the caveat is that ES6 doesn't currently run in any web browsers today. That includes the bleeding edge nightly builds of things like Chrome and Firefox. Therefore, the enterprise won't be able to utilize this technology for another few years. But these changes are coming, and they need to be considered as you plan applications over the next 5 to 10 years. On the bright side, ES6 should not interfere with any legacy code, so the code on the left will still continue to work. But there are other implications. Some popular JavaScript libraries, like AngularJS, have already announced that their future versions will be built on ECMAScript 6. Now, I'm going to come back to the story around AngularJS in a few minutes, but I want you to remember that developers need to be aware of what new features are coming and fully understand the impact to their development cycles. With regards to CSS, CSS3 has been around for a few years, and it was instrumental in bringing HTML5 applications to life. There are some exciting updates on the horizon for CSS, and we can see a few of the new selectors that are part of CSS4 here on the screen. CSS4 won't have quite as many drastic changes compared to ECMAScript 6. In fact, many of the improvements in CSS4 simply extend existing functionality, which should enable your code to do things like selecting specific parent elements, styling the internal versus external links on a page. They've included support for things like RTL. But like ES6, CSS4 is far from fully implemented on the modern browsers of today. Therefore, application developers need to think about legacy support as these features become available. If we assume aspects of CSS4 are available in web browsers 24 months from now, you need to ask yourself the question if your users are going to be able to download browsers that support CSS4. When CSS3 was first released, it presented developers with a wide range of cross-browser and legacy browser implementation problems. And that problem is likely to repeat itself as CSS4 becomes more widely available. Now, enterprise corporations often have employees spread across large geographical regions. But more and more, we are noticing a trend in users consuming applications away from their desks. This increase in employee mobility has highlighted a growing need for real-time collaboration within business applications. A recent survey from SailPoint stated that 70% of employees are now using mobile devices for work, and that 1 in 5 use cloud applications to share corporate data. In fact, many of Sench's own customers have confirmed that employee mobility has shifted their views on application development. Specifically, enterprise organizations are actively building apps which can be consumed on both desktop machines and tablets. For example, there might be employees on a manufacturing floor who need to use a tablet to complete some tasks, but they also expect to use the same application with the same interface on their desktop machines to complete other tasks. This example resonates across industries, as many similar situations exist in the services, logistics, and healthcare sectors. So applications now have the requirement of being responsive so that they can be accessed from any device. As I mentioned earlier, this was a feature looked at as a nice to have only 2 years ago, but today it is often a requirement for every new application. Today's users expect push notifications when work is actionable, and they want the latest data at all times, not just after a page refresh. Therefore, the next trend in building enterprise applications will go beyond responsive design to include true collaboration and real-time data. The solution to real-time collaboration in web applications is actually fairly simple, and it has been around for some time, that being WebSockets. WebSockets are an HTML5 technology that enables the client application and the server to synchronize data or state without having to manually refresh a page or hogging network resources. As you can see in the graph on the right, WebSockets can scale much better than vanilla HTTP requests, which results in both faster applications and reduced cost to your network infrastructure. But just a moment ago, I mentioned that other emerging technologies like ES6 and CSS4 cannot be used in today's browsers. Is that also the same for WebSockets? Thankfully, the answer is a confident no. With the exception of legacy browsers like IE8 and IE9, just about every browser used in an enterprise company now supports the use of WebSockets. And best of all, worldwide use of IE8 and IE9 are starting to drop very, very quickly. If we assume that trend continues, IE10 and IE11 will push well past 50% of the total Internet Explorer usage during the next 12 months. So your enterprise web applications can reliably use WebSockets on any browser. Finally, the last trend we'll cover in today's HTML5 landscape has less to do with HTML5 itself as it does with the internet in general, that being security, or really the apparent lack thereof. Over the past 4 years, I don't think I can believe we've gone more than a few weeks without hearing about some massive data breach, web hack, or security event on the evening news. Perhaps the most troubling fact about that is that these security breaches are happening to some of the biggest and most trusted companies in our worldwide economy. And even worse is that these hacks have personally affected nearly everybody in America. In April of 2014, Home Depot suffered a massive security breach in which roughly 53 million email addresses and 56 million credit card accounts were compromised. Company representatives stated that affected customers, quote, should be on guard against phishing scams, which are designed to trick customers into providing personal information in response to the phony emails, and that this event would likely cost Home Depot more than $62 million. But retail companies aren't the only ones being targeted. Companies like eBay have also suffered multiple cyber attacks, one of which last year was a cross-site scripting attack, which is particularly worrying for HTML5 applications. The Sony Pictures hack made possibly the biggest headlines of all in 2014, with terabytes of data stolen and the personal information of employees made public. That event caused international headlines. It embarrassed many corporate executives, and it may cost Sony more than $100 million when it's all said and done. Finally, healthcare giant Anthem was hacked just a few weeks ago. And again, tens of millions of customers had their personal data stolen. The point is simply that security is a trend that will remain in the headlines for the next 12 to 24 months. And it will be very interesting to see how technology vendors and HTML5 developers in particular respond to these growing threats. So in the prior two sections, we covered how HTML5 has been fully adopted across the industry as a powerful platform for building and deploying applications. We also discussed some interesting trends that will affect how enterprise organizations will utilize HTML5 in the coming years. But most developers will agree that while HTML5 has matured, some critical day-to-day problems still exist as a result of the web's success. Let us now examine a few of these issues in detail before presenting some possible solutions to those headaches. So the first and most common problem I think enterprise companies face today is simply picking a technology stack. And in the HTML5 ecosystem, choosing a framework to build your application has really never been harder. If we think back to 2007, which is basically the dark ages for web technology, you only had two options to build your application. First would be to use jQuery or maybe underscore or some small utility library and hack together a ton of unorganized JavaScript. Things like MVC and MVVM didn't exist. Or you could use a larger framework like EXTJS or YUI or maybe Sprout Core. But many of the logos you see here on the screen didn't exist 3 years ago, let alone 7. And the general trend in HTML5 today is to scaffold a solution on your own by cobbling together several of these libraries or pulling in other things. Let me be clear. Many of the libraries that I'm talking about are really useful, and they're definitely built by a lot of really smart people. In most cases, they're completely free because they are released under any number of open source licenses. But for enterprise development, there are several downsides to having all of this choice, and they go well beyond having to simply pick the libraries you'd like to use. Most of the popular HTML5 or JavaScript frameworks that are used today are considered, quote, modern browser only, meaning that they only support the latest versions of the major browsers, so IE 10 or IE 11. While this certainly sounds like a good idea in theory, the reality for enterprise companies is that legacy browser support is usually required. Consider that even jQuery, the web's most popular JavaScript library, only supports current browsers and their most recent prior version. This sounds reasonable until someone points out that Chrome and Firefox release new versions every 6 weeks, which essentially requires you as the developer to take time testing your applications in the alpha and beta channels for each of those browsers. Now, one library that made the decision to recently drop support for legacy browsers is AngularJS. And they openly stated that the decision to drop legacy browsers was made because it made their lives easier to develop the framework, having nothing to do with if it made your life easier to use their framework. Now, AngularJS also believes that legacy browsers affect, quote, only a very small proportion of users. And yet nearly every enterprise company will be required to support legacy browsers. In short, regardless of the libraries you choose to build your applications, it's important to remember that today's modern browsers will be tomorrow's legacy browsers. Therefore, it is critical for enterprise developers to choose a library or framework that is committed to supporting the same browsers that your organization does. One more common problem caused by cobbling together multiple libraries is that the result of doing so is a completely customized framework that is owned by your organization. In this sense, the libraries themselves aren't really the problem. It's the customized framework that you end up building on top of those libraries, which you are forced to maintain over the lifespan of your application portfolio. For companies with a small number of developers or who have to support relatively few applications, the approach of building your own framework makes a great deal of sense. And I'm not trying to speak ill of that. But most enterprise organizations employ large numbers of developers, sometimes as many as hundreds or even thousands of developers in some of the largest companies. And these developers must support a huge portfolio of applications. So therefore, creating a custom amalgamation of JavaScript libraries, as well as the glue that holds all of those libraries together, is simply impractical. Training developers across the organization on custom-built code is unfeasible, and maintaining that custom code without breaking legacy applications is near impossible. What about finding help? Where can enterprise companies turn when a critical open source project drastically changes direction, or worse, withers from the lack of community support? The development of all open source projects is completely dependent on the whims of their community. And unless your company invests heavily in shaping the future of those projects, it can lead to big problems. There's no one you can call on the phone to help fix bugs or issues specific to your organization. And you often can't send your developers to consistent training on those libraries. So the harsh truth is that open source projects have no alignment with the enterprise. For example, Google spends a ton of time and effort as the corporate steward of AngularJS, but AngularJS does not drive any Google revenue, and it doesn't depend on the adoption by enterprise corporations. Therefore, Google really has no reason to meet your needs as a developer or a development manager for a large company. Furthermore, Google does not offer official support for AngularJS. So anyone who needs to solve business-critical bugs in their code must solicit help from individuals in the community, maybe by the mailing list or an IRC channel, or by Googling websites, maybe landing on Stack Overflow. Finally, what is an enterprise organization supposed to do when an open source project drastically changes direction? The future version of AngularJS completely abandons the existing approach to building applications, which will leave everyone who has invested time learning AngularJS 1.x behind. And all of those applications built with Angular 1.x will never be able to be migrated to the new paradigm. So I realize I'm harping on AngularJS right now, but these risks really apply to any open source project that you might find on GitHub or Google Code or anywhere else. The next problem most commonly faced by enterprise companies today deals with fragmentation. And as I just covered, there's a tremendous amount of fragmentation in the available frameworks and tools within HTML5, but this fragmentation really only gets worse the deeper you dive into building applications. On desktop browsers, NetMarketShare has recently released their latest browser statistics for worldwide browser usage. And it's great to see that Internet Explorer continues to slowly decline in its massive market share, and Chrome and Firefox continue to gain traction. But it's important for you to read between the lines when you see some headlines like this, because the individual browser versions also continue to shift, as IE8 and IE9 are still shrinking, yet IE10 and IE11 are gaining market share. Now, the same is also true of Firefox and Chrome, and it's interesting to note that those two browsers put out new versions as often as every 6 weeks. So this puzzle is constantly shifting. The point here is that building web applications ultimately means you're delivering code to more browsers than you can physically test. Testing is a gigantic headache for the enterprise, and that's a problem that's really unlikely to get better as we move forward. But for the enterprise, the problem isn't just testing applications against browsers that exist today. The modern browsers of today will be the legacy browsers of tomorrow. So again, choosing the most reliable tools has never been more important. The applications developed in enterprise corporations have been known to stay in production for as long as 5 to 10 years. So it's more than likely your developers will have to update and maintain those applications for years to come. Now, as we saw a moment ago with AngularJS, I think it's very concerning to think about what applications built on Angular 1.x will have to do in 2 or 5 years as that branch and the open source support for that branch withers and dies. Having to rewrite a critical business application every 2 years as the new JavaScript flavor of the day pops up is simply not an option for enterprise corporations. And if you even think about throwing mobile devices into this matrix of fragmentation and support, your head will probably just explode. These are some stats I found the other day, and I think they're just staggering. Clearly, there are too many variations of device hardware, operating system, screen size, and browser version to keep track of. I promise the solution to these problems of fragmentation and tooling and testing is not all doom and gloom. But let me present one final problem before I dive into some possible solutions. Given the problems we've seen so far, you might guess that enterprise organizations are not sold on HTML5. But web applications and web technology continue to be the go-to platform because it offers better device support than any other approach to building mobile applications in particular. Now, native apps will always have a certain appeal and an inherent performance benefit, but enterprise organizations don't like having to duplicate a lot of work just to build an application across multiple platforms. The same problems arise with popular cross-compilation tools, where you're sold on the promise of having a single coding style, maybe using C#. But that promise never really delivers because there are API mismatches across the various platforms, and you still end up building multiple applications, albeit in the same language. The key takeaway is that HTML5 is often the best choice to deliver incredibly robust application experiences across devices and platforms. But on the flip side, there are some reasons why the enterprise doesn't like HTML5 in the context of building mobile apps. 2 years ago, people might have said performance was the reason why HTML5 wasn't a good idea. But those problems are largely a thing of the past, thanks to more powerful devices and the fact that HTML5 has been widely implemented on every platform. However, securing data and managing user and device access still remain critical problems. The first of these issues, security, will likely always be a concern for web applications. Clearly, running a proprietary mobile app in a consumer web browser is not a great option. So it's no surprise why native packagers like PhoneGap have become so popular. But unfortunately, these native packagers don't do anything to encrypt the local data or the resources for your application. The second problem, managing user and device access, is also really difficult to solve. For example, if an employee device gets stolen, any of the data on that device is at risk of being hacked, and there's no way to really manage that. So let's review these 3 problems for just a moment. First, the enterprise needs to choose reliable frameworks and tools. But open source projects may have different priorities than your organization. Training, support, and the long-term maintenance of your code base still remain an issue. Second, there is an incredible amount of browser and device fragmentation, which creates many problems for enterprise corporations. Building applications that run across the wide variety of browser variants is difficult, and testing is even harder. And finally, the enterprise requires that applications be accessible across devices, but the critical features of security and user and device management don't exist. So although these problems seem on the surface to be difficult to solve, the truth is that many solutions actually exist in various forms. Some solutions are better than others, and certainly all are subject to one's own opinions, preconceived biases, and past experiences. Now, I mentioned at the start of the presentation that I work for Sentia, so I'd like to take just a moment to introduce our company before I dive into how we approach solving these specific problems. At a high level, Sentia is a technology company based in Silicon Valley. We create the frameworks and tools that empower developers to create amazing applications on any device with web technology. We were founded in 2007 and have continued to evolve and innovate with the latest trends in the tech industry. Gartner has positioned us as a visionary company in their Magic Quadrant, and we have been selected by the editors at SD Times as a 2014 SD Times 100 award winner in the mobile category. Our client base includes more than 60% of the Fortune 100, and we are very committed to working closely with them. This is something that really sets us apart from many open source projects because we understand that enterprise corporations have very different needs compared to small companies and consumer apps. Sentia is able to deliver value to enterprise organizations through our complete offering of products, training, and professional services. Our goal is to help you meet your business objectives faster with better user experience and lower risk. Sentia has literally bet our company's success on web technology. That's all we do. So I'd like to present how we approach those three problems in enterprise software development so you can see what our solutions look like. Earlier in the presentation, I identified that enterprise companies have fully embraced HTML5 as a development platform because of its intrinsic ROI from cross-device application delivery. But we also conceded that many of the popular open source libraries may not be the best choice for developing enterprise web applications. Sentia shields our enterprise customers from all of that churn and uncertainty. Our JavaScript framework, EXTJS5, is easily the most comprehensive JavaScript toolkit in the industry today. You can see some of the features included in our framework here, but the important thing to remember is that all of these features are integrated across the entire code base. Therefore, it's easy to scale your application development across the organization, as all applications, legacy, current, and future apps, all adhere to the same development paradigms. EXTJS has always been Sentia's flagship product. It was originally created in 2007, but it has evolved with the needs of our enterprise customers, as well as web technology in general. Features like touchscreen support, two-way data binding, and MVVM architecture are modern additions to our feature set, but legacy browser support is truly one feature that sets it apart from the competing JavaScript libraries today. In short, EXTJS enables your organization to build high-performance applications that live in any browser, platform, or operating system. When it comes to solving the problem of fragmentation, Sentia again stands out from the options in open source. Now, I mentioned how our EXTJS framework supports a wide variety of web browsers. That includes everything from legacy IE8 to the latest releases of Chrome, Firefox, and various mobile browsers. But we also need to remember that the modern browsers of today will be the legacy browsers of tomorrow. And Sentia is committed to making sure that EXTJS continues to support the environments our customers need for years to come. But fragmentation also extends beyond just desktop browsers. there's an incredible amount of fragmentation within the mobile world. One of my earlier slides showed some sobering statistics on mobile device fragmentation, and Sencha is committed to helping our customers navigate that minefield with two approaches. First, in order to achieve our goal of delivering apps to any device, the EXTJS framework necessarily supports mobile browsers, both the actual web browsers as well as the web view if you're building a natively packaged application. And although we take it upon ourselves to test EXTJS across all of those browsers and environments, we certainly understand that the enterprise can't do that of their own code base. So Sencha realized there had to be a better way to deploy web applications to users across enterprise organizations with a consistent runtime that would help to mitigate this browser and environment fragmentation. So that leads me to the second approach, that we created Sencha Space, which is a secure managed application environment for HTML and JavaScript-based applications. Sencha Space allows you to deploy HTML5 applications, which are written with any framework, not just our own, and you can deliver those applications to any desktop or mobile device. Its runtime is based on the latest version of Chromium, so Sencha Space eliminates the need for multiple code bases as you deploy across devices. We eliminate the need for native packaging, and we eliminate the need for complicated cross-platform testing. Sencha Space also enables you to easily solve the third problem that we discussed, that of employee mobility. So application mobility and security are really the two biggest problems that are faced by enterprise companies today. Running proprietary mobile apps in a consumer web browser isn't something most enterprise organizations want to do. So it's no surprise why native packagers like PhoneGap have become so popular. But these native packagers don't do anything to secure access to your application, nor do they encrypt the local data and resources. And as I just mentioned, Sencha Space solves the problem of mobility by delivering your applications across all devices on a consistent Chromium-based runtime. But best of all, security is baked into Sencha Space from the start. Each application runs within its own secure sandbox, and all application data and resources are completely encrypted. Sencha Space also helps you to simplify your organizational security. It helps to manage risk by providing user access control and end-to-end data security. Sencha Space makes it easy to instantly deploy apps, grant and revoke user access, and delete sensitive data over the air just by using our centralized administration console. Real-time analytics, reporting, and audit support enable you to monitor your application environment. You can understand user and app utilization, and ultimately help simplify audit and compliance processes. So I think we can all agree that HTML5 is powerful, mature, and available on every device. That's the reason why enterprise organizations will continue to adopt web technology as the platform for building their application portfolios. And the trends we covered in today's webinar will certainly shape application development for years to come. But while HTML5 has matured, some critical day-to-day problems still exist for enterprise application developers. And I certainly encourage you to explore if Sencha's solutions can help you they can help you deliver amazing applications across every device. If you'd like to hear more about general trends in HTML5, best practices for building enterprise web applications, and more, I would highly encourage you to come to Sencha's annual developer conference called SenchaCon, which is happening in Santa Clara, California in just a few weeks. You can check out the full list of conference sessions by visiting senchacon.com. And if you reach out to me directly, I can give you a 20% discount code for attending this webinar. I think that's all I have for today. So Alex, do we have any questions in the Q&A?
We do indeed have a few questions here. By the way, I'm Alex Handy. Sorry for missing the beginning of this meeting. I am senior editor of SD Times and taking over for Dave Rubenstein here, and I've got a few questions for you, Art. First, what advantages has a freelancer developer using Sencha against other frameworks?